Hi, I'm Steve Sherman, creator of Power of Process. I'm here tonight with a good friend who traveled with me and hiked down to Angel Arch in Utah, Salt Creek, Utah, and he and I made an exposure virtually the same time of the day, and we came away with two very strikingly different images. I'm also fortunate enough to have the gallery owner that handles my work in Louisville, Kentucky. Paul Paletti is well known to many large format photographers, and I'm fortunate enough to have not only Tim Jones, the artist, but also Paul Paletti. Hi, I'm Steve Sherman. I'm here with my good friend Tim Jones, who both he and I, back in I think the year 2000, hiked down to Angel Arch in Canyonlands, and came back with two very unusual renderings of Angel Arch. We're here to talk about how two accomplished photographers could hike some 13 and a half miles, never talk about what we were going to do once we reached the arch. Once we did reach the arch, we only had about a half hour, 40 minutes of time to make our photographs. And I don't even think we spoke about what image, how we captured the image until months later when we processed the film and made a print. So because of the video series that I'm doing, I just thought that the contrast of the images was striking enough that it warranted a video that we're here to do tonight.
Great. We'll just keep rolling there. So first of all, you've already introduced yourself. Why don't you introduce Tom, greetings, salutations, start off with however long you guys known each other and how you finally got to your prints. So Steve, you're going to introduce.
So as I said, my good friend Tim Jones, we met in, I believe, 1981, immediately became friends. We had a lot of things in common as far as raising young children, families, baseball, photography. Tim has probably become my closest friend over these years, and we continue to share a passion for large format photography, slightly different approaches and end results, but nevertheless the underlying foundations are very, very similar, and it just provides a terrific opportunity for he and I to spend some time together in really an adventure type atmosphere. So I'm happy to have Tim Jones here with me tonight.
I'm honored that you included me here. Thank you.
Well, so Tim, as I've tried to say, we spent this. We actually hiked down for about 8.5 miles the first afternoon, and we spent a night in a tent and got up early the next morning. It was about 7 o'clock in the morning, and had a mission to cover 5 miles in 2 hours or less, and have about a half hour, 40 minutes of time to make a photograph of Angel Arch. It was about 9:30 to 10 o'clock in the morning when the film was actually exposed. But I think the thing that's most striking about what you see here is Tim's vision is considerably different than mine, although the arch obviously is the main focus of the image, and the fact that we didn't even talk about this, I still to this day find it very noteworthy. So, share some thoughts as to.
Well,
your
typically
image.
we've photographed countless times together, and we always end up in the same area, but we rarely talk about what we're going to do or what our vision is or what lens we're going to use or what filter. We're just we're our own creative selves. We see things sometimes similarly, sometimes very differently. The interesting thing about this adventure is that through a series of circumstances, we had planned to be at this spot for a dusk sunset type of photograph, camp in the area, get up the next morning, do something at dawn, and probably be 5 miles from here by the time the shutters were actually open. But things don't always work out the way you envision. So, but the point is that we were both hell bent on getting an exposure at this place. We worked so hard to get to it that we were going to get there and set up the camera and make an image. So, this is an example of two completely different visions. As it turned out, Steve set up somewhat closer to the rock formation than I did, and I was well behind him. And I had a picture in my mind leading up to this trip of what I wanted to accomplish here, and it was totally different than this. I'd imagined maybe a sky with clouds in it, or possibly in the morning getting a photograph of just sunlight streaking across the arch and having the bottom half in shade and the top half in sunlight. But again, we got there probably an hour too late for anything like that. So when I got there, I had this blank sky, and I knew that I needed to do something with it. I didn't want to have a blank, stark, light-colored sky in the photograph. So what was working in my favor was being in Utah in late summer. You sometimes get that deep cobalt blue sky, and then you have the red rock. So once I saw what nature was giving me, I said, well, you know what, you got to go with what nature gives you sometimes, and not try to make something that's not there. Just use what nature's giving you and build on that. So being that I had blue and red, I knew that I could separate those tonalities if I used the correct filter. I could darken the sky and lighten the red rock at the same time. And I said, well, I'm going to go as far away from reality as I can. So using some hocus pocus with a filter, I darkened the sky, and that in turn lightened the rock. So I had a good negative to start what I wanted to do with. And I ended up, plus development, some selenium toning on the negative, hard contrast paper, a little dodging. It wasn't one thing that turned this into this. It was many, many increments. So I ended up with I was thrilled to get a nice negative that could go in this direction, and that's what I ended up with.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, as far as the approach that I had in my mind, my style is I don't do a lot of high contrast skies. I like rich shadow information, and I design negatives in that manner. Way back, 17 years ago, I certainly didn't have the knowledge base that I have now, but at the same time, my aesthetic was still very similar to having rich shadow information. So, as Tim said, I had an idea in my head, and I, just thinking, as I heard you say, we didn't really talk about this. It dawned on me that, here's two extremely close friends having such a knowledge base of large format sheet film photography. We didn't feel the need that we had to talk to one another and bounce ideas off of one another, because I think what that says is that each of us were so confident in our abilities, we didn't need to pass an idea by our counterpart or our peer. It was, we knew what we wanted to accomplish, but at the same time, there was never this idea that, I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to do. It's not that kind of relationship. And I still go back to the fact that they're so starkly different. I think it's worthy of this video and this discussion. As far as my own aesthetic, as I just said, as you've learned in previous videos, I kind of hell-bent on creating a sense of depth, and you do that with spatial relationships, you do it with tonal relationships, and the fact that there's this big rock that has some shadow to it, at least in my mind, it gives a sense of depth in between the rock that's very close to the camera and also the arch that's very far away. The fact that the shadow is kind of in between these two tonalities, at least to me, adds a further dimension of interest. So, that's really the basis of why I chose, the composition and the tonalities that I chose. I did not filter the sky at all. And as Tim said, it was a very dark blue sky, but if you give enough exposure and decrease development, nowadays with multi-contrast papers, you can exaggerate the contrast in the midtones and still preserve a relationship on the bottom and on the top that essentially is very compacted. So that's really the story of how my negative evolved to the print that you see here. And I think we're fortunate here tonight in my home to have the gallery owner from Louisville, Kentucky that handles my work. I hope Paul will join us and at least offer some thoughts on what he sees, and maybe just offer a thought on two distinctly different renditions, and maybe I'm sure everyone's aesthetic will probably arrive somewhere in between these two extremes. That's the beauty of having a real knowledge base with film photography, where you can create your own imagery. You don't have to rely on something that's fixed. There's a lot of creativity that's involved. There's a lot of technique that can be expanded and exaggerated. And what you see here is just that. It's been greatly exaggerated. Neither of these renditions is literal. Far from it.
No, not at all. That was one thing that flew through my mind when I was looking through the ground glass, is that I could take a nice picture postcard type photograph here, but I didn't work so hard to get there that I wanted something different, something that's the beauty of black and white photography. You can bend reality into your own vision. You could pre-visualize something and say, you know what, I want to go in this direction. I don't want it to look like it looked to the naked eye.
Well, I think I've said this for years, that photography is a photomechanical process, and I think because of that, there are many lay people that assume that if they had my equipment and they had my knowledge, that they could produce the exact same photograph. That's not the case at all, because there's something that happens in between that, and it's called your mind, as to how you perceive what's in front of you and how you choose through your own technical abilities to portray that. And I think that, because we're photographers and because we can fall victim to the comment that, well, you're using a camera, you're using an instrument of capture, that there's no creativity involved. So I think by nature, there's part of me that always wants to deviate from reality for no other reason than to impart my own vision and stamp on what's in front of the camera.
One other interesting thing, I hadn't had the opportunity to look at Steve's print at length before, but if you look at both of them, there are mirrored areas in each of them that essentially contain the same density and the same tonality. If you look in here and you look in here, they're very close in tonality. Both prints have a pure white in them somewhere, but what we do as black and white photographers is, it's nice to be able to manipulate what's in between those two. They both have a black, they both have a white, but what's happening between those two is what really creates excitement in a photograph.
And I know you folks have seen me say this in other videos where I show this example of a pure swatch of black paper and a pure white paper. That's just the maximums that the paper can produce. What we react with is the midtones, the areas in the middle of what Tim just said, with the higher density areas and the lower density areas. It's what happens in the middle that draws the response from each of you. So I think that's another very important aspect of black and white photography that's really under the control of the artist himself, not so much the camera or the instrument of capture. So, I don't know how much time has evolved through this video, but I just think that it was a very worthwhile discussion, and I hope, if you have comments, I hope you would reach out to me and reach out to my blog and respond to this video, leave some comments, and I'll leave my own comments.
One last tidbit. I don't know if I had pointed this out to Steve or he'd forgotten or not, but his camera is actually in my photograph. So he's way down here. You could see his camera. I don't remember. This was a long time ago. I don't remember if we were communicating for him to move. I think I probably just didn't bother him, and I probably just waited until he bent down to get something out of his camera bag. But he's in my photograph. So you can see the scale here of how different lenses can portray the same subject. You know, a fairly wide angle lens here, a more normal to slightly long lens here, and that's where he was positioned in the frame. So.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And you know, just a little sidebar to the whole thing, and obviously I had no knowledge of this ahead of time, but as Tim alluded to, we hiked down in an afternoon and well into the night before we camped. It was not a very hot day at all. Water was not a big issue. However, the next day, as the temperatures can do in the west, they really spiked quite a bit, and by mid-afternoon, our hike back turned into one of the most uncomfortable times for me that I can remember, and that was due to lack of water. My friend who has summited the biggest mountains in North America, he had just a little bit of water left in his supply, and every so often he'll remind me of that.
It's all about miles per gallon, man, not speed.
It was a life's experience, I can tell you, one that I cherish now that I'm sitting here plenty hydrated. Hi, I'm Steve Sherman. So I'm fortunate enough to be here tonight with not only the creator and my good friend of this particular image, myself who created that image on virtually simultaneously exposures back in the year 2000, but I'm also here with my good friend Paul Paletti, who owns a gallery in Louisville, Kentucky, and he represents my work. So this is an awesome opportunity for Paul to share his thoughts on two distinctly different images. So I'm going to hand this off to Paul, let him share a few thoughts. And when Paul is done with that, I'm going to ask Tim, my good friend, to step in and interact with Paul about his particular image. Paul?
Well, thanks for the opportunity. I've known Steve since about 2007, I think it is. And so I'm very familiar with his artistry and his particular style of photography. And I've known Tim for a number of years, maybe going back almost that far. And although I know Steve's work much better than I know Tim's. So this is a really interesting situation that they both went to the same place together and photographed at the same time with the same subject matter. Of course, one of the first decisions and things that comes to mind is they both were doing large format black and white photography. It could have been color and rendered something very different, but they were both using basically the same materials to begin with. The fact that Steve's image goes along so much with his expertise and his interest in very finely rendered gray tonalities. They're really luscious and distinctive within that, to make some very gentle lines, and then of course this large black vertical piece in the center. And then you see Tim's, which is literally night and day, except that they were both done during the day. And I saw these both together for the first time today, and it struck me, first of all, it takes a little looking to figure out if Tim's is a negative or a positive. You can kind of backtrace it and think that this was done with a red filter, but it could almost as easily be a negative print. And you rarely see this kind of solid black in that image in such a great quantity. And it makes it very stark, and it takes my words away a little bit, but it's a very stark rendition and totally different from the aesthetic that Steve is using. So it's really great to see that difference. and a very, very dramatic image on Tim's part, as contrasted to a much more subtle image on Steve's part.
Paul, do you get it? Is there anything that strikes you as one is horizontal, one is vertical? That's also obviously a complete opposite, which again we did not know was going to take place.
Right, and again, photographers' choices in what they were seeing and how they were constructing the image, because both of them are very graphic in their designs. Both of them, Tim's a bit more offset. This one balanced between the monolith on the left and the arch a little bit to the right. But again, the most striking thing to me is the very stark tonalities in Tim's work, very high contrast, high key, almost lithographic in the way they come across, versus a lot of subtlety and attention to the long grayscale in Steve's. Just very different treatments, very different visions.
Thank you, Paul. Tim, did you want to step in and say a couple of words?
Paul's got any, observations or questions? A couple of things that I hadn't pointed out earlier. Again, when you're under the ground, under the dark cloth, and you're looking at the ground glass, you're in the driver's seat. Your mind is, you're making a lot of decisions, and I know how.
And everything's upside down and backwards.
Yeah, well, you forget about that. You get used to that. You don't even think about it. You're just, another photographer friend of mine said, well, our job is to fill space. And, so I recall now, the more I think about it, composing this image, this area here, because I knew there wasn't going to be detail here, and I wanted a solid base here to kind of offset or complement this large dark area here. So that was a conscious decision on my part to include this vegetation down here, knowing it was going to, by what I was doing in the darkroom and what I was doing in my exposure, that it was going to become literally pure black. So that was a conscious decision on my part.
Did you envision that the sky becoming pure black as well at that point?
I did. I didn't know if I could pull it off, if I had enough tools in my toolbox to do it. But when I pulled up to this scene, there wasn't a cloud in the sky, and I'm not a big fan of gray tone skies. Because you get that a lot in New England. So I said, you know what, I have to do something different here to not get a gray tone sky. Not that there's anything wrong with what Steve did. His is beautiful in all kinds of other ways, but yes, this was my vision when I was exposing. I said, this is what this scene is giving me, and this is the way I want to take it. And yes, that was all planned. And it took quite a few different techniques to get to that, from there to here.
Mm-hmm. Just technical question: how many exposures did you make?
I made two of this scene, and I did. It was such hard work to get there. I did make two horizontals because I thought it might work in both directions, but when I proofed the horizontal, I didn't like the shapes. This was too close to the top. I wanted to give the arch plenty of room above it, and in my mind, it just didn't work with the tones that I had. So that negative never got enlarged.
But both of the horizontal and the vertical both had the bottom dark line as well.
Yes, they did. And what happened is, now this is a 5x7 negative. So what happened is, the top of the sandstone, to me, there was not enough headroom. I'm an old portrait photographer and a wedding photographer, and people sometimes say, well, if you're photographing somebody sitting down, that you want to compose the image so that they have enough room to stand up, and it didn't feel like there was enough room above the arch in my composition. So that's why I chose this vertical.
And even within the gray tones there, you've still chosen some to go very very high contrast in that treatment,
Mhm.
as contrasted with what Steve's done in kind of celebrating the middle and lighter gray tonalities.
Yes, that's true. That goes with the whole motif of this image. Stark, cutting, coarse, where Steve's version is delicate.
Well, I think it's very successful what you've done.
Thank you, Paul.
So again, I hope you folks enjoy this. I hope you interact, reach out to me with your comments about this. I think it's a very telling video, and I want to thank sincerely my good friend Paul Paletti and essentially my lifelong adult friend Tim Jones. I'm thrilled to have their acumen as part of this video, and I hope you find it entertaining and worthwhile to your own photography.
Well, thanks for including us. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you both.